Welcome to another show of Celebrate Life. My name is Gary Carolis and I'm your host. Before we begin today's show, I wanted to mention an event coming up in July that I think is very important for all of our listeners. There's going to be a telethon. It'll start on Friday, July 25th at 6 p.m. and run through Saturday, July 26th at 6 p.m. And the whole point behind this is that CCTV has lost a lot of federal funding and needs to recoup those funds. And who better than us Vermont, Burlington citizens to help out a real community gem in CCTV. They just celebrated their 41st anniversary yesterday. And if you've been following this station over the years, you know that they've been there when other media hasn't. As a former city councilor years ago, every Monday night, they were there recording our meetings, some significant and important events throughout the community. So anyhow, hope that you could attend the telethon at some point and make a contribution to this incredible organization, and it would be greatly appreciated. So if you're new to this show, Celebrate Life is all about an interview program to celebrate people's lives that are very much alive rather than wait for the obituary at the end of our life, which I've always found to be disappointing and sad at times because I get to read some people's lives that I wish I had met when they were alive. So this show does that, and everyone has a story to tell. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or you know someone who might like to be a guest on this show, please write me at celebratelife0747@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to talk to them and see if we can arrange a time to have them on the show. Now I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Tracie Hauck. Hi, Tracie.
Hi, Gary.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And just to be, for the community's sake, Tracie and I have worked together over the years in the recovery field. And so it's really an honor for me to have you here today as a guest.
It's an honor to be here.
Oh, good. So we want to celebrate your life, Tracie. Where would you like to start?
I don't know. I think, like I said a little earlier, it's hard for me to imagine I'm 60. It's like, where did the time go?
Yeah.
I still sometimes feel like I'm a lot younger, which is good, I guess.
Yep.
But, you know, my life's had a lot of changes over the years and growth, and it been doing a lot of reflecting on my life and things that I've been through and things that I've overcome that amaze me that I was able to overcome them. You know, and hold my head up and still move forward.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to me. It's like, how did it happen and how was I able to accomplish that?
When you talk like that, it makes me think of that phrase, the oyster that, the grain of sand that irritates the oyster creates the pearl. And that's very much your life, hasn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for all that sand in my life over the years.
Well, where did you grow up? Where did you start?
I grew up in Orwell, Vermont, on a farm, dairy farm, youngest of 7 children. My parents, I think they had 7 children because they had a big dairy farm and they needed
help.
They needed the help. And they had 7 kids within 10 years.
Wow.
So I'm the youngest. The oldest is 10 years older than me.
Okay.
I was the next oldest, was 4 years older than me. So I was kind of the thought that my parents had that none of my siblings wanted. You know, when I came along, it was kind of like, I know my sister hated me for a long time because she was the baby.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it took us quite a while before we got past that. But, you know, and then there was always because all 6 of them were lumped within like 6 years, you know.
Oh, man.
They had they always like to tell me they had the toughest childhood. You know, my parents were hardest on them, and I got away with everything, and I didn't really. I think my parents were just kind of tired by the time I came along. And they knew everything. Like, I knew my mother knew everything I was up to if I was trying to do something sneaky. She knew it before it happened.
Jeez.
And she'd let it happen, and then she would just come back with a calm comment. Like, this is the one that shocks me. Like, when I was, I don't know, 16 maybe, a girlfriend and I decided, we both had boyfriends, we decided we wanted to go to Planned Parenthood and get on birth control, right?
Okay, yep.
So I wanted to borrow the family car to go to Rutland to go shopping on a specific day. My mother kept asking, like, why that day? Why do you have to do that? And I said, just works out, right? And so we went to Planned Parenthood, got on birth control. I think maybe a week or so later, I was sitting in the kitchen and my mother turns around to me and she says, so, why do you feel like you need to be on birth control? And my jaw just dropped and I was like, how did she know that? But she knew. She had like that intuition or just
Mother's
experience with 6 others. I don't know.
So she wasn't too tired to...
No, she wasn't. She wasn't. But she was always very, you know, she never came down hard on me. It was more like, why? You know, and just wanted to know my thought process.
That's good. Wise mom.
Yeah. Yeah, she was pretty wise.
Did you work on the farm?
Yes.
Yeah?
I milked the cows and went barefoot through in the barns.
Up early in the morning?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that, you know, when growing up, you know, I went to high school in Fairhaven, which is like 30 minutes away. And farm life affected sports, you know, because you have to take the late bus from Fairhaven if you stay after for sports.
Right.
My parents were milking the cows at that time. If it was winter, they didn't want to drive down to the general store in Orwell to meet me at the bus stop. So I didn't do a lot of school activities, you know.
Yep.
I mean, I stayed after. I tried a few things, but, you know, it was always difficult.
Yeah. And they could use you at home, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Wow. So what was life like, though, as a farm family?
It was a lot of hard work, a lot of creative time, I think. Like, you know, because it was about 3 miles outside of town, and had horses, had cows, had, you know, dogs, cats, all that stuff. And you didn't get to hang around with your friends that much. Like, you couldn't go to a lot of social things or parties because you didn't have transportation, or, you know, nobody wanted to come pick you up in Orwell. And, you know. Yeah. So, I remember riding horseback. I joined Horse 4-H and was part of that. And, you know, just a lot of imagination, you know, like, you know, I remember camping out in the woods behind the house and just, I don't know, pretending you were somewhere else and living a different lifestyle. I used to ride cows too. I had pet cows, you know, and I could ride them in the pasture, and I'd have calves that I used to like getting the calves when they were bigger, like, you know, not really heifer stage, but a little smaller, taking them out in the yard, and then used to pretend like I was like in the rodeo and wrestling heifers down on the ground. Like, I mean, it was tomboy. Like, right. But it was, you know, you had genuine friends, you know, family networks, like my parents' friends and their kids would all come. They would all help with farm work, like haying season, things like that. Yeah. And, you know, it was just, I thought it was boring at the time. Yep. But looking back on it, I just think it was it was very helpful to grow up in that kind of environment. You know, I didn't have a lot of the outside influences that, you know, there was no social media. There was none of that. You didn't have those influences, right? And, you know, you just had a landline, I mean, and 3 stations on the TV channel if the weather was good, you know, back then.
How big was the farm?
It was, they had, I believe it was a little over 300 acres, and we milked about, probably an average of about 100 cows.
Wow.
Yeah.
A day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Twice a day. And
300 acres. That's almost, that's more than half a square mile, right? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was a lot. It wasn't, you know, haying was always a big experience in the summer because the fields were far away, so you'd have to drive quite a ways on the tractor. And, you know.
And you, how old were you when you first got on a tractor?
Oh, gosh. Probably 10. Yeah. But it was fun. You felt, you know, felt powerful. And I remember in the winter, because where we lived in Orwell, if we got a bad snowstorm, you know, we were on a dirt road, and, you know, we were always one of the last roads to get plowed out. So, like, if we had a bad snowstorm, my father had a big John Deere tractor, a 4430, that had a cab, had heat in it, had air conditioning, had an 8-track tape player in it, and had a radio. And a lot of times in the winter, if we couldn't get out, my father would get my mother and I, we'd get in the tractor and we'd go drive down the road and go visit other people.
Wow. What role did the faith community have for you and the family? I mean, it's like that rural life. Was that like the church have any?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my parents weren't, you know, they weren't go to church every Sunday. It was, you know, but all of us, well, I'll speak for myself. I don't know for sure if all my brothers and sisters had to go to Bible school in the summer. You know, I had to do that.
You had to.
And I got confirmed into the Protestant church in Orwell. And that was about it. We went on holidays.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, I think faith was kind of, you know, I was always taught about God and, you know, and heaven and all that and do unto others and all of that. But you know, it was kind of like, I think now it's almost more like the way I look at faith is like spirituality and higher power. And, you know, it took me until I became an adult and actually got into recovery before I really understood what my spirituality was all about.
Right. Yep. Gotcha. Was the Orwell schools or Fairhaven, was there mostly farm kids?
Yep.
Yeah.
In Orwell there was. You know, I mean, my class probably never had any more than 16 students in it in elementary school in Orwell. And then, of course, when you went to high school, you went to Fairhaven.
Right.
And that was, I think, 5 towns that made up Fairhaven.
Okay.
And several of them were small, like West Haven, Benson, are very small towns. Yep. So then you met all kinds of different people. And, you know, it was scary. But it was kind of good. I don't know. I mean, my high school years were pretty good. Everybody always says, oh, the best years of your life. I don't think so anymore. I mean, that's what everybody used to tell me. These are the best years of your life. I'm like, I don't think they were really the best years of my life, but they were okay.
That would be sad if those were the best years of our lives.
I know. I'd like to have it happen so early in your life.
Downhill
and
ever
to be over with. No.
Did you, when you were at Fairhaven or even younger, did you have ideas of what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Well, I did, and you know, at first, I think when I was maybe a sophomore in high school, I had this idea that I wanted to be like a clinical psychologist because I was always into like serial killer stuff and different things like that, and just the why, like what goes on in someone's head or what has happened that to them, always intrigued me. So I thought I wanted to do that. And then when I became, I think it was the beginning of my senior year, for some reason, my mother always wanted to be a registered nurse.
Really?
But she never got the opportunity to go to school. So I all of a sudden got this idea. I think I was taking an anatomy and physiology class in high school. And I just got so interested in it, right? So I said, well, I think I want to be a registered nurse. And my mother, she thought my sister, the one next oldest to me, she would have been the nurse, but she didn't want to be a nurse. So when I said I wanted to be a nurse, my mother was like, really? She said, well, you can give it a shot. If it doesn't work, that's okay. She didn't really think I had it in me.
Interesting.
But I ended up going to Albany Medical Center School of Nursing. And I was 17 when I went there.
Wow.
And that was because my birthday's in December, so I was always like the youngest. And that was quite a transition.
I bet. From Orwell to
Albany,
New York.
That was
big city.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. Wow. And she kept saying the whole time when I was in school, you know, if you decide you don't want to do this, that's okay. We understand. But I did it. I worked in Albany for a couple years after that. And then some events and things, I ended up moving back home after my father died. And, you know, I ended up working as a nurse for 30 years.
30 years. Well,
Yeah, almost 30.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
What specialty did you have?
Family practice a lot.
Yeah?
I did work in, when I first started, I worked in a GYN oncology unit at Albany Med. And I loved that. I loved that. And then when my dad passed away, it was a tragedy. He committed suicide.
Oh, gee, I'm sorry, Tracie.
And so I felt like I needed to move home. So I moved home. And, you know, but I never really got back into that field. And then the rest was all like family practice. I did work at a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon's office in Florida for a while. And then when I moved back to Vermont, after living in Florida for 15 years, I went back. I worked at a nursing home, and then I got into a family practice office. So those are kind of my little escapades with that.
And what about nursing did you really captured your attention? What did you love about it?
I think I just love to be able to help people and try to make them feel better. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
It seems to be my common theme in my life as I look back.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's not that I have all the answers, but if I can make their day a little better or make them a little more comfortable. And it was always interesting because nothing was ever textbook. And, you know, I noticed that when you go to Albany, when Albany Medical Center School of Nursing was open, it closed a few years after I graduated. I had nothing to do with that, just so you know. But, you worked pretty much 36 hours a week at Albany Medical Center while you were in school.
Wow.
You had to work shift work. You worked in every unit, you know, and so you've got real hands-on experience and saw what it was. So like when I graduated and I started working on the GYN oncology unit at Albany Med, there were a lot of, you know, like 4-year degree nurses that came out, didn't have as much clinical. And it was just amazing to me that how much different the learning process is when you're learning through books mainly, rather than the experience, because nothing ever goes the way it says in textbook. There's always interesting little strange things that happen with people. It's not always textbook.
The difference between theory and practice.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yep. I could see you gravitating to the practice.
Yes.
Enjoying that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm kind of one of those learners. If I do it and see it, you know, then I learn it better than reading it in a book, because then I just think about it like, oh, all these different scenarios and what does that look like, and you know. But when you see things for the first time, then it sticks with you, like, and it keeps you alert to things in the future.
What did your mom think about you actually getting your degree and working in the field?
Oh, she was very proud of me. Very proud of me. And I think, you know, and my dad was too, even though my dad was not someone that said that. He was always very reserved in giving compliments because he was afraid you were going to get a big head and, you know, you were going to have a huge ego. So he wanted to make sure you didn't get too cocky.
See.
But he was, I mean, but like my capping ceremony, which was 6 months into the nursing program, he wasn't able to come because it was hay season and the weather was crappy. So the minute they got a good day, he had to go out and hay.
Of course.
And he felt horrible that he couldn't come. I mean, and, you know, but he came to my graduation. I know he was really proud of me. He always said I'm an offhanded, backwards kind of
Yep.
keep you in check statements. I don't know. But, you know, I continued to, you know, as I worked as a nurse, you know, there was a lot of things like my family relied on me for a lot of stuff. You know, my mother had health issues later in her life, circulation in her legs. She had moved to Florida my dad died in '88, and she decided to move to Florida, sell the farm.
Wow.
And so I couldn't let her go to Florida by herself. So all of us girls, I have a sister who's mentally handicapped too. She's passed away since then, but my sister, the 3 girls and my mother all moved to Florida.
Wow.
And, you know, we had some fun down there. It was nice. And my mother stayed down there. My sister moved back to Vermont in, I think, early 1990s, I think. And I stayed down there. And then in 2002, 2003, I decided I wanted to move back to Vermont. My mother had quite a few health issues. You know, I helped manage her health issues, made her go to the doctor because she was stubborn.
Yeah.
And, you know, the doctor I worked for was her doctor, so I could.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And then moved back to Vermont in 2004.
Did she stay?
Yeah,
then?
she stayed in Florida.
She stayed in Florida.
With my sister, who was mentally handicapped.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yep.
My mom ended up passing away in 2015 on New Year's Day. And that was quite a whirlwind. My sister and I and my daughter went to Florida. We had heard she was in the hospital and that, you know, she had an option of, you know, the circulation had basically shut down to both her legs. And so the doctor had talked to me on the phone and said if she doesn't have surgery, you know, she's probably not going to make it. So I had to talk to her on the phone. And he needed me to confirm that she'd be a do not resuscitate. And, you know, as I talked to my mother, she was tough. She was tough. She didn't want anybody to care for her, you know, have to go out of their way to do things for her. So, you know, her health had been declining, but everything was fine when you talked to her on the phone. So when I talked to her that day on the phone, she was in the hospital, and I said, you know, if you don't have surgery, you know, you're not going to make it. And she said, I know. And I'm okay.
Okay.
And I said, okay. I said, we got a flight. We'll be down there. We're going to fly out tomorrow morning. And she said, yeah, there's no need to come.
She is a tough.
She passed away the next morning before we could get down there. But we had to go down anyway because my sister was down there.
Yep.
And my sister was living with her.
Yep.
And, you know, my sister was there at my mom's home when Mom got taken to the hospital. Luckily, she had a support person that came a couple times a week, I think, to take my sister out, like for outings and things like that. So luckily, that woman had come that day and saw my mother was in so much pain and called the ambulance, and then got my sister into another group home to stay until we got down there that night.
That's great.
And I went and saw her, and we were down there for 10 days, and I mean, what whirlwind of what we took care of in 10 days.
Can imagine.
It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I brought my sister back with me, and I was her guardian until she passed away in, is it 2021, I think, in November.
Wow. That nursing degree came in handy.
It did. It did.
In more ways than you would imagine.
It still does. I mean, I still get asked all kinds of medical questions. But I always claim, like, this is what I remember. It's not, I'm not actively practicing. So,
Right.
yeah.
So you've gone from that field of nursing to what you're doing today. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I had, you know, I think it, I don't even remember what year, probably 90, I had my daughter in 1996. And I think it was in the summer of 98, my ex-husband was from Toronto area. He was Canadian. And he had relatives in Vancouver, British Columbia. So we took a trip to Vancouver, British Columbia. And while we were out there, I had misstepped off a step and I herniated a disc in my back. And of course, with insurance issues, you know, health insurance, finding a surgeon, it took me 6 months before I could get surgery done. And I had surgery done on my back for a herniated disc on my birthday.
Oh my goodness.
In 98. But I mean, at that time, the pain, the nerve pain that I had, the sciatica I had was horrible. And so I got put on pain pills and that stuff. And I wasn't at a real happy place in my marriage. It wasn't like my ex-husband was horrible. He was a hard worker. He was a good man. But our ideas differed. We didn't have things in common. I don't know. It just was kind of one of those strange things. But I didn't know. I wanted to get out of the marriage, but I didn't really know how to get out of the marriage. And I didn't want to be the one to break up the marriage. So I kind of dealt with it. But what I noticed when I took those, Vicodin was what I was on, and you know, they gave me a sense of well-being, like they say. Like, I didn't have to deal with any of the emotional stuff. I could function, I could do what I needed to do, and that's when I originally got, you know, addicted to those. So, used those for a few years. When we moved to Vermont, I stopped using them, right? And I was okay and continued to work as a nurse up here, and then I don't remember, some health issues came up and somehow I got them again. And I really wasn't, the marriage was not that great. And, you know, I was off and running and I was forging my own prescriptions. You know, I was phoning them in and that stuff, and I got caught. And I lost my nursing license, and that was probably one of the lowest moments in my life.
Can imagine.
You know, that was my whole identity.
Yeah, your career that you love.
My income, my whole identity. I was afraid to go out in public. I didn't want to run into people who knew me as a nurse. But I got through it. You know, I went to get my nursing license back. You know, I did everything with the nursing board, having to pay for drug screens randomly. I mean, I had to check in every day, 7 days a week, see if I had to go for a UA. I had to meet with a licensed alcohol and drug counselor who I met with this woman in Bristol, and she was phenomenal. I mean, I think that was the greatest support that I got through that. And I went to her, I mean, initially it was like every week for like a year. And, you know, naturally back then I didn't think I really had any issues I need to deal with. It was just the addiction. But I learned about a lot of issues that I had that I just, you know, didn't look at. And kind of looked at my behaviors and things like that. And it was, and working the 12 steps with my sponsor, you know, and I got to step 4, that was really eye-opening for me. Where as I thought my behaviors were all good, I realized how they affected others. And that was really eye-opening for me. And I think that's how I live my life now, regardless of how I feel about something or what somebody has done to me. I still always think about how my actions are going to land on them, and are they true, or am I just reacting because I'm being self-serving,
Tracie, for those that don't know the steps, what's step 4?
Step 4 is where you're looking at all your resentments that you have in your life, and you look at what aspect of your life that they affect you, right? And then you look into it. To me, it was all about taking ownership.
Right.
I could blame, I did blame my ex-husband for my addiction. I said, if he wasn't the way he was, I never would have had an addiction. And that's what I thought.
Au contraire.
Au contraire. That was when I got to that 4th step, I was like, oh my God. And I remember my sponsor called me the director of my own show. And I was like, I am not. I am like the most understanding, tolerant, look at what I've dealt with person. But it took me a couple days for that to sink in. And I realized, I had set my ex-husband to fail, set him up to fail in the marriage. There was no way he could ever be right in my eyes, because I wanted him to do everything just the way I did it. I didn't accept him for who he was.
Yeah.
And that was really unfair, and I was able to look at it from an aspect, if someone had done that to me, how would I feel, right? And I still owe him an amends, and I think we're working through that. We get along now. We can go to functions with my daughter when she graduated college.
Yeah.
I was able to go to graduation with him. The guy I'm with now was able to go.
Nice.
My ex-husband was able to meet and be polite and have conversations, and and my daughter wasn't put in the middle, which she was for a number of years. Yeah.
So you got to recovery, started, and then what happened?
Then when I was setting up to meet with the LADC, I talked to her on the phone, and my appointment with her wasn't for like a month or something. And she suggested I go to a 12-step meeting. Well, I didn't know anything about 12-step meetings. And so I Googled 12-step meetings in Rutland, and I found about an NA meeting that was on a Friday night down at this place called Turning Point Center of Rutland on State Street.
And NA is Narcotics Anonymous.
Narcotics Anonymous.
Yep.
So I said, well, it was an evening meeting, I'll go. And granted, back then, like State Street and that area of Rutland was one place that I would not go alone in the evening.
Yep.
But I went. And when I walked in, they used to do dinners on Friday night, and they'd start serving at like 5 o'clock, and then the NA meeting would be at 7. So I got down there about 6:30. So there was a bunch of people in there, like serving meals and greeting people, and the nicest thing about it was when I walked in there, I figured I was going to be asked a bunch of questions about why am I there, Nobody asked anything. It was just like, welcome, how are you, would you like a meal, what can I help you with? And then I went to the 12-step meeting at 7, and I thought it was a cult. I thought it was the weirdest thing that, everybody had these sheets of paper with readings on them, and they knew when to do it, and it was just, I didn't understand the flow.
Yeah.
And it felt weird to me, and all the references to God, but I did feel welcome, and I did feel safe, and I didn't feel like anybody was questioning me. And so I just continued to go to those meetings, got to know more people that volunteered at the center or were part of the center. I had a felony on my record at the time for forging the prescriptions. Since I had nothing previously on my record, it was kind of like a deferred sentence. It was like I was on supervision for 3 years. And I had to do 100 hours of community service, so I decided I would do them at the Turning Point Center. And then the next year, I got the opportunity to go to the Recovery Coach Academy. And, back then the centers were a lot different. There was a lot less income.
Yeah.
you know, for
Yeah.
the centers. They ran on a,
Exactly.
and I think the budget at that time was like $98,000 a year. And,
Yep.
you know, I got a position there part-time, like a stipend. I think it was $325 a week to work there. And I was still trying to go back into nursing. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I did get my conditional nursing license back. And I got offered a job that was at the nursing home that I had been working at when I got caught.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was a great honor that they were willing
Yes,
to hire
yes.
me back. You know, they knew me.
Yes.
But the sad thing about that was, since it was a corporation, they told me I was hired. I worked 2 days. That was awkward, to go to work with other nurses that you know, and
Right.
you're not able to handle narcotic keys. It's
Right.
it's kind of that feeling like you wonder what other people are thinking about you while you're there.
Mm-hmm.
But I got through those 2 days, and I was off on Wednesday, and then I got a phone call on the Wednesday that, oh, the background check came back, and since it shows up that I have a felony, they couldn't hire me.
Wow. That's,
So that was kind of a big letdown,
I
but
bet.
you know, at the time, I think I had started the process of getting a divorce at that time. And I didn't have a lot of income. And I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do and how I mean, I had loads of debt. But, you know, the director that was at Turning Point Center there had resigned, or was getting ready to resign. And the board asked me to step up as interim director, and I didn't know how to be a director. I really didn't, but I had this feeling like if I didn't think the center would stay open, because the structure at that time was a director 30 hours a week, and everybody else was stipend employees or volunteers.
Right.
And I just, it was such a valuable resource to me that I couldn't take it away from others.
Yeah.
And I just had this feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be, and I don't really know why, but I'm going to follow it. And 10 years later,
Impressive.
here I am.
Here you are. And so that the board saw something in you.
I guess. Either that or it was slim pickings. I don't know.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and you're still the executive director of
Yes.
the Turning Point Center.
Yes.
10 years
Yeah.
down the road. Yeah. So
Lots happened. in
Lots
those 10
happening.
years. Yeah.
absolutely, all good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk about some of those things that you accomplished?
Well, you know, one of the greatest things that I am so proud of is the peer support in corrections.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we started doing that at the center in 2016, and it was through a grant that when we had pathways guides that worked with people that were on medicated assisted therapy, and it was to do groups, and one of the groups was started in the correctional facility right in Rutland. And so I would go in with our pathways guide, and we did those groups. And the need was just so high.
Yeah.
I saw in there with substance use, you know, and just wanting to connect with people to try to get better.
Yeah.
And, you know, we lost our pathways guide. She ended up getting let go. And then that funding for that kind of went out the window.
Right.
But I decided, why don't we just have this part of our center stuff and just do these groups twice a week at the correctional facility? And we continued to do that. The groups, I mean, there would be anywhere from 25 to 30 individuals at every group. And they were voluntary. They weren't made to go.
Right.
And then we applied for a community grant, the Bowes Health Trust through Rutland Regional Medical Center. It's a 3-year pilot grant. And we got it. It was the first grant. It was like $100,000 over 3 years to get this program up and running. And then we started doing one-to-one recovery coaching. We continued the groups. We started having people getting released and continuing with their coaching and just more aware of the center when they get out, that they would come there for help, even if they didn't stay involved with recovery coaching when they got out.
Yep.
And to see what that provided for people, that ability to connect and feel safe, because, you know, anybody that struggles with substance use, I think the biggest thing that happens when you try to get into recovery is you have a lack of trust.
Yeah.
And you feel terrible about yourself.
Right.
And you think everybody knows everything about you, so it creates a world where you want to isolate and you want to stay away from people. And this provided an opportunity for people to be seen as people,
Yep.
not convicts or felons or addicts. It was your people.
Yep.
And you went through stuff. How can we help you get better?
That's right.
If you want to get better.
Having gone through this yourself, your antenna was really up high about what it might feel for someone else who's going through this and creating that safe.
And I think I'm kind of intuitive. I don't know, or sort of an empath in a sense. Like I relate very much to emotions behind things, right? And I know that emotions are kind of one of the biggest drivers of what reactions or what actions we take going forward. And you know, like I've never been incarcerated. I've never gone to rehab. I've never been arrested or, you know, any of that, never gone through any of that. But I seem to be able to have that ability to know how it can make you feel. And I just think of if you can relate to the emotions behind it, regardless of what the circumstances are, you can connect with people. Like everybody's been in situations like, and a lot of times when I speak at different, you know, events or different things talking about recovery, you know, I ask people that have never struggled with substance use to try to like think back to a point in their life. Everybody's done something in their life where they've hurt somebody, made somebody angry, and maybe it was unintentional, right? But it happens. And then you think about what's that process like? Like say if you do that with a close friend or a family member, what's that process like of healing, right? And getting back to where you can have conversations like you used to. It takes a while.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think if people think about that, when you think about someone who's maybe been using substances and have hurt their family for a number of years, you know, that substance they were using was their coping mechanism for all the bad feelings and good feelings and in-between feelings, right? So when they make the decision that they want to stop using substances, they're left with all the negative, right? They don't have the coping skills to really be able to look at it and deal with it. And I think that they, you know, I mean, I know I did. It took a long time for me to see anything positive in myself.
Will I ever be happy again? Will I ever
do I deserve it? Do I deserve to be happy? That was a big thing. I mean, you know, because then if you're happy and things are well, does that mean you're forgetting all those bad things you did, right? But forgiveness of yourself and, you know, learning different coping skills, you know, and like going back to like, you know, when someone just makes that decision to stop using drugs and you know, they're feeling their emotions sober, there's a lot of negative emotions that come from the people around you. Like if your family doesn't trust you, right? That plays out a lot longer even when you're in recovery. So, you know, but it's not on your time frame, it's on their time frame when they're ready to forgive you. And I think that's one of the hardest things in recovery to be able to wrap your head around, because addiction makes you very self-serving and you take care of your needs first and you don't worry about anybody else. So this is a big shift.
Yes.
And then looking at when people have had a lot of trauma throughout their life or while they were using, those things play into their recovery.
Yeah.
And if they have slips, the first thing they're going to think about themselves, oh, I had a slip. I'm a total failure. I'm never going to get that. Everything is irrational thoughts, right? And you need to have people there that like, well, you did a few things right. You did these things well. You developed these tools, but you just need to beef up your plan a little bit.
There you go.
And I think just working with them and really acknowledging that they're not a failure, because the first thing they think of is they're a failure and they'll never get it.
Do you, when you've developed the staff at the Turning Point, and these are all people in recovery themselves.
Yep.
Do you share some of your wisdom with them? Is that part of your role as the leader?
Yeah. I try. It's different in the way that, my staff has come to me is not by me posting job descriptions. My staff has all come to me through either, like meeting them at recovery coach academies, or they went with someone, or they volunteered, or they were getting recovery coaching from somebody at our center. Then they started volunteering, and you really get to know what their recovery is about, right? And you get to know how they function, right? And if are they owning their own stuff, and are they open to multiple paths of recovery?
Right.
And so it's always a challenge because everybody's different, and but it's always a work in progress. We don't want to alienate anybody that walks in the door. We don't want them to feel like whatever they're able to do to support their recovery, or whatever recovery program say they're going to do, we don't want to tell them that that's not going to work, right? We want them to try. We may know they may need more, but we're not going to tell them that. We're going to support them.
Right.
Because the biggest thing is when someone has a slip and you're in that recovery coaching relationship, what happens a lot of times, if someone relapses, they just stop showing up. Then the next thing you know, you hear that they may have overdosed and died. I don't want people to feel shame for the relapse and not show up, right? Because that's all part of the process of recovery. If you have a relapse, what are you going to do? You get back on the horse and you move forward.
Exactly.
And that's where the credit needs to be given to them. Like if they show up after a relapse, it's like, I'm just glad to see you here. And you're wanting to keep trying. And my staff is they're really strong. I mean, I got some dedicated people that have been there for a number of years.
That's great.
And it's amazing, that whole work.
So that program that you started, and then you got the grant, and then it blew up in a good way.
Yeah, I didn't, we'd done a number of, I think we did an interview back in the beginning with VPR, and had Nina go in with us in the jail, and she kind of put that out. But DOC, Department of Corrections, the higher ups, when they were asked about it, they're like, we don't really know what they're doing down there in Rutland. You know what I mean? It was just, and I'm like, you know what? If they don't acknowledge it, we're still going to do it because the need is there. And if it doesn't go any bigger than right here, this is it.
Yeah.
And I think it was like in the summer of 2023, I started to hear that, the commissioner from DOC and some of his people were at Marble Valley Correctional Facility talking to individuals who were getting coaching from us. And I found that out from the coaches that go into the facility. And I'm like, well, what's going on with that, right? And it took a while before I found out. It was like a couple months. And then they reached out to me. And they wanted to model this program across the state.
Wow. No.
I was skeptical at first, you know, I'd heard a lot of things about Department of Corrections. My biggest fear was that if they got behind it and say if they funded the expansion of this work, what I'd always heard was that if you're getting funding from DOC, then you kind of have to be, if you hear anything, you need to report it, right? Well, doing recovery coaching and talking to people about relapsing and that stuff, if we did that, we'd have no trust with any of the individuals we served. And luckily that is not the case. And now, you know, then they came out with, they got some funding, and now we have funding to go into the correctional facilities in all of them around the state, except for the St. Albans facility, because that recovery center didn't take that grant.
Right.
But, you know, Newport, they're going to start one-to-one coaching up there. They've been doing a group. They're going to start that this month. My coach, Lewis, has been going to Newport once a month to follow with like 20 guys that he started coaching at Marble Valley. He's going to transition them over to the coach at Newport. Springfield has got a coach that goes in and does groups and does one-to-one. And of course, they've got, you know, the whole Sims model down there. So they're working with a lot of the players. St. Johnsbury's doing a group. Chittenden Recovery Center has got, you know, Mars that goes in and does coaching there and does a group. But it takes a while to build these programs, which I emphasized with DOC, because these are people in recovery, and depending on where they came from, like what their experiences were, if they've been incarcerated, they may not feel comfortable going into a correctional facility. There may be triggers. You know, they have to have strong ethics and boundaries. They got to follow the volunteer process at the correctional facilities. And there's sometimes some scrutiny. When you go into a correctional facility as a volunteer, and, you know, the COs and the staff are looking at you like, this is a person in recovery. Like, you know, stigma.
Yeah. Exactly.
People don't always trust you. You know, they think you're up to something. So it takes a while to get comfortable in there.
It's like when the program in the hospital started, there was a lot of stigma that went along with recovery coaching going into the medical center, for example, here.
Right.
But over time, the meeting people in recovery, these doctors and nurses started to understand better what it's all about.
And I mean, I went to a meeting, a social worker meeting at Rutland Regional Medical Center a couple months back. And it was a very proud moment for me, because I got invited to go to that meeting with someone from Rutland Mental Health, and they have peer workers now that work with substance use. So they were going to present about what their peer worker does, right? And so I went to the meeting. I didn't know what my purpose was, but I went to the meeting, and come to find out, they wanted to know, talking about the emergency room program, they wanted to know how they could get some of those pages or get people referred like they do, you know, they page our coaches 24/7 if they've got somebody up there that they identify as having a substance use issue. Well, they kind of wanted to get in on that a little bit, right? But the social workers said, no, we're going to stick with Turning Point because they're awesome, and those ED coaches are wonderful, and they follow through, and they work so closely with the social workers that it's amazing. And you know, it doesn't matter that these are people in recovery. You know what I mean? Nobody stigmatizes about it.
That's beautiful.
You know, and it's really nice to see.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is, and I. You know, of course.
So how many, in a given month, would you say, how many people walk through your Turning Point Center?
Oh, gosh, you're going to get me with data.
Just
I'm going to say probably, around 300-400 people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And when you started in 2015, what do you think it might have looked like?
Well, it was much looser back then, and I don't think, I was naive. I was naive to a lot of behaviors that people have with substance use. So what I found out like a year or two after was that Turning Point was known as the place to go get drugs and make connections.
Mm-hmm.
I was naive because I wasn't in that world. I was a closet user, so I was very naive to that.
Right.
And then we started to make a change that you need to be engaged in our programs to be here. Either go to groups, go to 12-step meetings, get recovery coaching, volunteering, but you need to have a point to be there.
Right.
Right? It's not about just coming in and hanging out, because
Right.
there were a lot of things that
Right.
were happening, I guess. And, it was funny at the time, the board, one of the guys on our board at that time had been one of the longest standing members on our board. He was also a person in long-term recovery. And he came to me and he said, "Oh, plenty of directors have tried this. You're not going to be able to succeed." But it did.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly what it was, but it was kind of asking, like, not people weren't able to just walk in and just roam around
Right.
without staff kind of approaching them like, "Hi, how are you? Anything
Yep.
we can do for you?" Like,
Yep.
and it got rid of some of that.
Yep. That's great.
So now it's really respected, I think.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah.
We're getting towards the end of our interview. Any awards that you've won in your work?
Yeah, I've won a couple.
Yeah. Why don't you mention
I
those?
think at, was it 2 years ago? Is it 2023, I think? At the Recovery is the Answer, Recovery Partners of Vermont conference, I was awarded the Mark Helgis Award.
Recovery Pioneer Award.
Yep,
Right.
for the corrections program.
Yep. That's
For
great.
establishing that. I've won some other, I've gotten an award from Serenity House, as a couple years ago. Got an award, I can't remember what it's called, from United Way that was presented to me
that's
for the community. So, I mean, every time I get one of those things, I just like, me? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
it feels weird to me. And but I don't really think of them as, I think it's my father back in my head saying,
Tap it down.
tap it down. And I think I always, I'm grateful for the recognition. I'm grateful for the honor, but it's the work that's important,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You still need to continue to make that work the most important thing, and the people you serve are the most important,
Right. Absolutely.
and that. So I think it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel it's kind of silly to get awards for doing the right thing to do, but
It's a nice affirmation about
is.
your work and your team.
yes,
Your whole team.
yes, my team. We wouldn't have gotten where we are if it wasn't for the team that
Yeah.
I have.
You have a great team.
And they've all grown in their recovery and the work, and I see changes in them. With their growth and how they interact and how they treat others, and they're much more mindful of their behaviors,
Yep.
which I think is
Beautiful.
it's hard to do. It gets tiring at times. You don't want to be mindful. I'd like to be just like some of those people you see that just go out and do whatever you feel like and act whatever way you want, but that's not really fair to do to other people.
Yep. That's right.
So I love to see the growth, and I love to see people doing the work and getting excited and happy for people they're serving when they, get one milestone. Just, make one change in their behavior. And when I see my coaches getting excited about that, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because people need a cheerleading team behind them with
Absolutely.
this. They
Yep.
do.
Is there, do you have a quote or a motto that you follow in life that you want to share with the audience?
Progress, not perfection.
Progress, not perfection.
That has become my motto.
That's a beautiful motto.
And I say that to a lot of people that we serve. I say that to everybody, like if you get, I kind of tend to be a perfectionist. I have high expectations of myself. And I don't allow myself a lot of grace. That phrase helps to keep me in track.
Yeah.
Like, it's my intentions. I don't have to do it perfectly, but
I
and
love
if
that.
it doesn't work, I need to do it a little different.
That's beautiful.
You know, and that's my motto.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest thing in recovery is like that. You know, before recovery, it was like I always had this. I had to know everything. I had to be able to do everything right. I just needed to know, right? Now I still have that tendency, but I can counter that with you're learning this, you're developing new tools, you're looking at things differently. You can be open-minded to change every day of your life with your perspective, how you deal with stuff, how you manage everything that goes on in here, you know, and how it shows out in the world. And I love that feeling of being able to grow. It gives me a little bit of freedom. It lessens some of that perfectionism, but like I said, that still always comes instinctually. So
It sounds like you're a much better friend to yourself today than you
I
used
am.
to be.
I try. I was thinking about this last night, and I think, you know, I tend to be guided by what I need to do. I don't always focus on things that I want to do. And I'm trying to balance those
That's good.
more.
Yeah.
You know, my wants are important.
Yep.
And, you know, I need, you know, my work kind of becomes my life sometimes. I need to balance that a little bit better. I miss times with, you know, I don't see my daughter as much.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Vacations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Anything that we haven't touched on that you want to mention?
No, not really. I mean, I just want everybody to realize that you don't have to do things perfect in life. But, you know, if you do have some issues, just be honest with yourself. Have the humility to be able to look at it. Makes me emotional when I think about that. But and just move forward, because that's the only choice you really have.
Yep.
You know,
That's right.
you just have to move forward.
Yep.
And figure out the best way that you can pick, even if it's just a baby step.
Yep.
You know.
In fact, it's probably a good thing that it is a baby step rather than a quantum leap, which might end up being too much
That's
change
right.
too quick.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here's to baby steps.
That's right. In progress, not perfection.
Progress steps. Thank you, Tracie.
Thank you very much, Gary.
All right.